Hello and welcome to the Columbia Daily Tribune's Behind the Stripes football webcast, the first edition of the 2014 season. This is Tribune sports editor Joe Walljasper, along with Tribune football beat writer David Morrison. David, we're a few weeks into preseason practice. Let's begin, I guess, at the top. Maty Mauk now taking over as a starting quarterback. What is maybe realistic expectations for him this year after going 3-1 as a starter last year?
Well, I think, coming off of that performance last year and just kind of the poise he showed in not only his 4 starts, but the Georgia game as well, coming in the fourth quarter, a lot of people were expecting Chase Daniel type numbers from him right away, and then after maybe 2 scrimmages, especially when he goes 8 for 20 in the last one, people are maybe saying, well, he's going to only complete 40% of his passes this year. So I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. You can't read too much into the scrimmage performances because those are only, a tenth of what he's done during camp. The other 90% we don't get to see. And then you can't really read too much into the performances last year because some of his best performances came against some of the worst competition in the league, against Kentucky and against Tennessee and teams like that, even though he acquitted himself pretty well against a good defense in Florida in his first start. So, as far as expectations, he says he wants to be up in the 60s and ideally actually at 70 to 75% completion rate this season. I think that'll be tough to achieve because safe throws don't really seem to be in his DNA almost. It seems like he'd rather try to get something downfield and try something more risky than a check down or something like that. And that's something that I think the coaches are trying to breed out of his game a little bit, also keep in there because that's where you get big plays. That's where you get 96-yard touchdown passes to LaDainian Washington and things like that. So I feel like he can be a serviceable SEC quarterback in his second year. A lot of it's going to have to do with how well his supporting cast comes along because he did have so much more of an accomplished group of receivers last year.
I guess they don't get too carried away with scrimmage statistics just because the fact that they can't really hit the quarterback, so he knows that, and so that affects their judgment. And also, that their scrambling is not a part of the equation, and the defense knows that because they just have to touch him. So I've seen lots of quarterbacks look better in games than scrimmages, really just based on that one factor. So that doesn't alarm me too much. I think for him, I would say the expectations, at least for some, are maybe a slightly unrealistic or elevated just based on he did so well at the end. And I think people remember the good times from a good season.
Right.
The completion percentage was low. In the spread offense, 50% is really low. I think a more telling stat is really yards per attempt, which he was actually really good at. He was about an 8, and if you in the NFL, an 8 will get you in the Hall of Fame. So, if he can continue to make some plays happen downfield, then I would be less concerned about the completion percentage, unless trying to make those plays downfield, he's throwing a lot of interceptions. I think most people would agree he probably got away with a few throws he shouldn't have last year. So even though he had a really nice touchdown-interception ratio, it probably could have been higher. So I think if you can keep that to an interception or fewer per game, if you're still going to be attacking, because he really doesn't I don't know that he has a lot of receivers that you're going to be able to throw short to and expect them to do great things. They're just not a lot of game-breaking guys. We'll touch on the receiver issue a little bit later on in the podcast. But for him, I think a reasonable goal would be, if you can nudge that completion percentage closer to 60, if not to 60, while still taking some shots down the field. That's kind of what you're looking for with him. Secondly, through 2 scrimmages, maybe give your thoughts on who some people are that have maybe improved their stock, maybe some freshmen who may have kind of earned their way into some playing time.
Yeah, well, some of the freshmen in the receiving core are going to have to play. It's kind of a numbers thing at this point just because, and like you said, we're going to get to the receivers later, but that seems to be the topic that hangs over everything at this point. So, a guy like Nate Brown has shown pretty well in a couple of the scrimmages. They haven't asked him to do all that much, but, he got free on about a 20-yard post in the first scrimmage. He ran a good route and got, shook off some 2-man coverage. I don't know, I'm not Stack, so I can't I can't rattle off those things
in so
exactly.
Many ways, really in every way. Go ahead.
We're both Daves.
Yes.
Anyway, but yeah, Nate Brown's done himself some favors. Lawrence Lee's looked pretty good in the slot role. It seems like they just want to use him as kind of a, give him 4 or 5 yards and see what he can do type of guy. But the most impressive catch of the two scrimmages so far was one that didn't count from him, where he went up between three guys on a Saturday and brought it down, but landed out of bounds, just kind of one-handed stab on the sideline. So I mean, he's been what they've wanted out of him so far too. So I think he's improved his stock. I mean, a guy like Charles Harris, we can hear coaches talk about him all camp, and we have. But then when we get into the scrimmage and see him go against Mitch Morrison, do really well, do well against the first string left tackle, we can see that Charles Harris can be a guy that can definitely be a Marcus Golden or Shane Ray from last year, that can come off the bench and be really productive as a backup defensive end. So I mean, I feel like those are the three that really kind of stick out to me right now.
Yeah, I would concur on Charles Harris. You weren't here at this point, but I know back on signing day in 2013, he was sort of like emblematic of everything that was wrong with this program. You've got this stale coach and nobody wants to play for him, and you're resorting to signing this kid who didn't even have a profile on Rivals.com, and nobody had ever heard of him, and who is this guy? You beat out Northwest Missouri State for him, or whoever had offered him, and then a year later, it just says Gary Pinkel's image has gone up. So is this, suddenly this kid who everybody was kind of making fun of for them signing is now in line to play a lot and does look good. He's very athletic. So I think it's kind of could be one of those kind of fun stories of a guy that they kind of diamond in the rough type guys who they've had a lot of on the defensive line. I think Michael Shears looked pretty good linebacker, who he's a redshirt freshman, I believe.
No, he's sophomore.
He's looked pretty good. I think he's going to maybe be able to come in and do some solid work at linebacker, which they kind of need with the loss of Andrew Wilson. Thomas Richard was maybe one of the wide receivers we hadn't heard as much about of the true freshman group, but he, at least in the first scrimmage, I thought did some nice things. And in the first scrimmage also, Trayvon Walters, I thought, did a decent job at running back. There's probably going to be either he or Ish Witter, I guess, probably one of the two is going to be able to play as a true freshman. So maybe one of those guys.
Yeah, and then another guy who's not a freshman, but he is a newcomer that I think is really helping himself is Kenya Dennis, too. He's the junior college transfer from Mississippi. He's kind of like Deron Singleton was last year, except he's got a couple months head start on Deron Singleton, because Singleton came in a week into fall camp last year, whereas Dennis was here for the spring. And so it seems like they can really use him as both kind of the third corner, and then also as a backup nickel back too. He's big and tough enough, and he's physically ready to play in the box at nickel. And then also he showed he's got some man coverage skills downfield in the first scrimmage. He stuck with Darius White and picked off Maty Mauk in kind of a 1-for-1 situation. So I mean, I feel like he's done himself a lot of favors too, and he can be definitely somebody that adds depth in that secondary.
And then lastly, I would say, kind of as going into this season, people are saying like, well, Marcus Golden and Shane Ray could be better than the guys they played behind last year, Coney Ealy, Michael Sam. I think you might be saying the same thing next year about Josh Augusta and Harold Brantley about playing behind Lucas Vincent and Matt Hoke. I mean, those guys will look pretty impressive in scrimmages to me. So that's not a big surprise, but I think their defensive line really is a big-time strength for them this year.
Yeah, especially Augusta. I don't understand how somebody that large can move that well.
Yeah, he runs out plays. So he's good.
I can't move that well, and I weigh I think less than half of what Josh Augusta does.
That's right. And lastly, what impact do we think the wide receiver attrition is going to have? They were going to lose a lot even before they started losing more, just from losing LaDainian Washington and Marcus Lucas. Then you also lose Dorial Green-Beckham, obviously, in the spring, and then Levi Copeland suspended for the year. So now you're really getting pretty thin there, to the point where they're kind of talking about obviously moving Marcus Murphy and using him some in the slot, maybe using tight ends more, et cetera. Just kind of how do you see that situation affecting the team, and how do you see them maybe adapting to the lack of bodies?
Right. Well, that's the first thing, is diversifying receiving sources. Because, last year, you look at it, Marcus Lucas, LaDainian Washington, Dorial Green-Beckham pretty much made up 2/3 of the targets. They were 2/3 of the pass offense all by themselves. I don't think you can take three guys and make them 2/3 of this pass offense. I think you're going to need maybe 5 or 6 guys to make up as much as those three did last year. So you've got guys who played a lot last year in Jimmy Hunt and Bud Sasser, and you can kind of lean on them. And then past that, it's anybody's guess. There were a lot of expectations around Darius White, even though him and Maty Mauk have had trouble kind of hooking up over these first 2 scrimmages. But at least he's kind of an experienced player who's been in the system a couple of years and is a senior. You got freshmen to factor in. If Gavin Oddie, depending on how serious his high ankle sprain is, he's going to be in the equation. Wesley Leftwich, the Hickman grad, he's been kind of waiting his turn for 4 years now, and he's shown pretty well in these first 2 scrimmages. So it's just a bunch of sources that really we don't know all that much about in game situations right now. And I think that, they're going to have to diversify their passing attack, like you said, with Marcus Murphy either in the slot or out of the backfield. They looked for him on a couple of screens in the second scrimmage when he was playing tailback. So I think even when he's in the backfield, they're going to try to get him involved in the pass game. And then the tight ends, it seems like every single year, maybe over the last 3 years, but it's been like, will the tight ends finally get re-involved in this offense? I think if they're going to, this is the year to do it, just because there's so many question marks at receiver, and guys like Jason Reese and Sean Colkin have shown that they can catch balls in the open field and make something out of it. I mean, even during the second scrimmage on Saturday, they seem to be playing Colkin and Reese and even Clayton Eckhart in the slot more than they did last year. So I think they're definitely looking at that as a solution as well.
Yeah. I know the first day of practice, Gary Pickle mentioned the offseason, he thought Jamon Moore was really ready to come on strong. I haven't really noticed him much in the scrimmages, though. I didn't notice him too much in the spring. He's another guy that's in there. I'm kind of a Bud Sasser believer. I think I'm not sure he's a number 1 receiver as Missouri may have come to expect what a number 1 receiver is, but I do think he's good and he's capable. But I would have to say I would be for using Marcus Murphy as much as you can. I don't know I would do it at the expense of his regular turns in the backfield. I thought until Henry Josie kind of rounded into form later in the year, I thought Marcus Murphy was Missouri's best running back maybe the first half of last season. So I think you really are giving up a little too much if you just turn him into a slot man where he's not going to touch the ball nearly as much. I can see using him there when it's Russell Hansborough's turn. I think that's fine. But yeah, I would be more tempted to maybe use more 2 tight end formations if you're convinced that you don't have enough good receivers that are worth playing than to really take him away from what he does best. All right, well, that's it for the first webcast of the year. Join us again next week when we will look forward to Missouri's opener against South Dakota State.